This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. To learn more or to subscribe, visit beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew. Thanks for joining me on this special business-focused episode of the podcast, brought to you interruption-free by the transformational beverage industry technologists at Encompass. Their digital platform is designed to connect everyone across the supply chain, from producers to distributors and retailers, so that you have clear, real-time visibility into your brewing business with powerful analytics to support your decision-making. Collaborate to maximize sales, minimize empty shelves, and eliminate product waste. Visit encompasstech.com to learn more about how they can help future-proof your business with modern technology. And speaking of future-proofing, that is the theme of this episode. That is what we are going to talk about for the next hour. Joining me for this conversation, first up is Patrick Tickle, CEO of Encompass, a beer nerd with a 25-plus year career in software and hardware technology. He's done everything from hunt down fresh heady topper on a delivery day to lead product for tech companies that range from chip and computer hardware manufacturers to cloud-based SaaS business services. Welcome to the podcast, Patrick.
Yeah, thanks a lot. It's great to be here.
You're joining us from Austin, Texas. Great weather down there. It's a little colder up where we are in Colorado, where I am in Colorado, but I'm a little bit jealous. I can't lie.
Well, as we were joking earlier, it's brisk in Austin today, and everybody's wearing stocking caps at 60 degrees. So, that's the way it is here.
Well, you have to have something to signify the season. Sure. Also joining me is Cole Hackbarth, VP of Brewing Operations for Rhinegeist Brewery in Cincinnati, Ohio. Cole's been with Rhinegeist for 9 years, and over that time has overseen one of the most impressive growth trajectories in modern craft beers. Rhinegeist produced over 110,000 barrels of beer last year. Just an incredible story out of Cincinnati, Ohio. Welcome to the podcast, Cole.
Thanks for having me.
It's crazy that we haven't had Rhinegeist on the podcast yet up to this date. So I'm super, super excited to talk about this. And rounding out the panel is my friend Dave Thibodeau, president and co-founder of Ska Brewing, co-founder of Peach Street Distillers, who's coming up on 29 years at the helm of the Durango, Colorado craft brewery. Of course, over 29 years, Dave's watched lots of expansion and contraction cycles happen in craft beer, and I can't wait to dive into some of Dave's experience and how to manage those. Welcome to the podcast, Dave.
Thanks, Jamie. Good to be here.
And that's another one. I can't believe I haven't done a ska brewing podcast yet, because Dave and I have known each other since 1996. Back in the 1995, I launched a ska magazine, ska zine called Skatastrophe. And then this little brewery that was getting started out of Durango, Colorado, called Ska Brewing, was like, how do we send you some beer to review in your ska zine? What a weird, funny story. When we were launching craft beer and brewing in the late 2013, I went and saw the Toasters play here in Fort Collins and was talking to Rob Hingley, the lead singer, founder of the Toasters, and mentioned that we were doing this. Like, well, you guys, the guys from Ska? He's like, well, I talked to him way back in the day. He's like, well, let me put you in touch. And he connected us, and that's the reason there is a Ska Brewing modus operandi recipe in issue number 1 of Craft Beer and Brewing magazine. And so it's great to see you. It's great to have you a part of this conversation, Dave.
Fantastic.
Like we said at the top, the focus of this month is on future-proofing your brewing business. I think, as everyone has seen right now in this month or the last few months of craft beer, there are a lot of questions hanging out there. There's a lot of breweries. It seems like breweries deciding to go out of business as that rate has increased. When I was up in FOBAB earlier this month, the word was that something like about 10% of Illinois breweries this year will have closed by the end of the year. That does seem like an acceleration from a normal rate of maybe 2.5% to 3% per year, which is what we've seen historically over the number of years. I don't think this is just endemic to craft beer. I think this is endemic to not just the entire hospitality industry. We are seeing it hospitality industry wide. We're probably ultimately seeing it economy wide, and I think that there's some broader effect that we're seeing now that's a result of larger scale, Fed monetary policy, interest rate hikes, and a broader overall approach to cool down the economy, which seems good to control prices, but at the same time has some serious and incredibly negatively impactful, incredible negative impacts on the way that some businesses, can operate in the world. It's a challenging time for craft brewing businesses. And so maybe we start off with a first, big and broad kind of question. From your standpoint, and maybe we'll start with you, Dave. From your standpoint, what are some of the major challenges that you see right now that you're feeling within the business? If we're thinking about in this broader context of future proofing, what are some of those items that you are really focused on in terms of the kinds of challenges and threats to the business right now?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and obviously the question we all wish we had the answer to. But I think the threats, a couple of the big ones that we're really kind of struggling with and trying to figure out how to face moving forward are, I guess, pricing and margins, looking at raw materials and the cost of goods going up, coupled with inflation. I guess it's all hand in hand. But at the same time, we've kind of come up against that consumer threshold on what they're willing to bear as far as pricing goes. So we're kind of at that point where our raw materials are continuing to rise, but the consumer is no longer willing to pay more for their beer, at least the type of beer that we come out with. That's a big one, I think. Probably our biggest, because in the past we used to be able to, just adjust pricing accordingly, and now that the trajectory of raw materials costs and consumer threshold, they're pairing away from each other now. And so that's a difficult one too. And then I think the other obvious one is what new products you're coming out with moving forward and what innovation might mean. And, it used to be if you just came out with a new beer, you could expect a bump in sales, almost regardless of what happens to your other beers. And now it's, are you coming out with an RTD, or are you coming out with some other Beyond beer, or are you coming out with a new beer that's innovative? And I think ever since COVID, there's a lot of innovation doesn't mean the same thing that it used to mean. You need to find another way to stand out. I think you can't have those same expectations with a new product. And for us, it's particularly beer. I mean, we do have the distillery, as you mentioned, but here at SCA, we're pretty focused on beer. It's what we're into. Most of the other Beyond beer categories they're just, you and I touched on it before the show. It's not in our soul. We probably aren't going to go there. So how do you innovate moving forward in a way that retailers or customers are going to grab a hold of it and run with it? Which is, I'm really excited to hear what Cole has to say, because these guys seem to have figured something out that I can't figure out. So it's great to have, Rhinegeist on the program. So I'm kind of excited for this conversation.
Sure. No, there's a cost to R&D. There's a cost to launching new products at scale. And, as we're now seeing, if you don't have enough years to recoup on that kind of investment, then you can actually put yourself in a tough position by doing some of this. And so being able to evaluate what those opportunities are in this day and age, in this current beer market, is incredibly tight. And I can't wait to dive into some of the ways that you look at it. Cole, from your perspective at Rhinegeist, what are some of the biggest challenges that, that as you all have identified them?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a lot of the same. It's cost of goods, rising prices everywhere, smaller margins, and just trying to stay competitive. Obviously, as a regional brewer, the further away from home we get, the more competitive it gets. Every city, every state has a local regional powerhouse now. So you can no longer just get growth and volume by expanding your footprint. Those gains are getting smaller and smaller as the years go on. So now you've got to focus at home and kind of penetrate deeper where you're already at. And that's where we found a lot of success. And that's always been one of our strong suits is being so deep in Ohio and kind of the tri-state area. And then, I think overall, just the generational shift in drinking that's going on right now. Everybody talks about millennials kind of aging out and drinking less because they're getting older, starting families, all that stuff. And then turning to Gen Z. What does Gen Z want to drink? Half of them aren't even legal to drink yet. And the other half are young enough that they don't care, right? When I was in my early 20s, I drank whatever was cheap. I didn't settle into craft beer until I was a little bit older. So I think there's just going to be some time between that generational shift until everybody kind of figures out what they want to drink and where craft beverage is going. And every successful brewery is just going to be kind of primed to jump on whatever emerges. And that's kind of what's driven our success is being open to things and kind of always experimenting and playing around with stuff. And just being ready for whatever comes next. Kind of adaptability has been our theme. But obviously a part of our DNA, having grown as fast as we did, was just always changing, always under pressure. And so now that the pressure is different in that we're not growing the way we were, the team is still ready for it, and we're just kind of used to it. So
sure,
we'll see where it goes.
I'm facing this generational thing myself. My oldest son is 18. We were just over in England and France, where he is of legal drinking age and was still not interested in consuming any beer. That's just not, they're just not into it. So it'll be interesting to see how that piece works its way out and whether that does change over time. Patrick, from your perspective as a leading a business that helps brewers gain insight into these processes, what are you hearing from your brewing industry clients in terms of some of the pieces that they are most concerned about, and how and then how are you thinking about tailoring the systems that you all build to help them answer some of these questions that are top of their minds?
Yeah, well, I think Dave, and it's a perfect. I can see why we have a great kind of cross section of the market right here, right? I mean, because I think Dave and Cole represent what we hear from all of our customers, right? I appreciate Dave's words about the soul of what SCA does, right? There are a lot of people in the brewing space that have a very deep connection to the soul of what they do, right? And that that's creates some challenges, right? And kind of reshaping that soul. And then there's absolutely people like Cole and Rheingeist that, right? That again, they haven't lost the soul of what they do, but they've kind of evolved to what they do, right? And again, back to Dave's point, he's interested in hearing more about how Cole's kind of built what they've built there, right? But I think and there's a lot of things, there's a lot of things that there's a lot of software analogies to like what's happening, I think, in brewing, right? I mean, I'm historically a long time technology person. I'm a Silicon Valley person, that has spent almost my entire career in technology. Good news is I definitely consider myself an informed consumer of craft beer. But there's terms like agility, right, and pivoting, and product market fit and supply chains, like those kinds of words that are things we live in software and in technology. All of a sudden, are terms that kind of apply to like every brewer, right? And by the way, every winemaker and every distributor, right? In the market we're in right now. So it is like you said, it's a very interesting time, but it's shaking the trees, right? In a lot of ways, for what we've all been used to for the last decade or so, right?
Sure. Well, let's start by talking about product, and I think this subject of innovation is one that you all brought up. That if you look at the history of craft beer, that psychograph of craft beer consumer has almost always been aligned with exploration. That you find that customer that wants to try new things. I mean, that's why they might even be drawn to the entire category, right? They want to try new things. They are there for some of that exploration. Otherwise, they could just drink the cheap, accessible stuff that's always there for them. If they weren't aligned towards wanting to try new things, then they may not be attracted to the category at all. This is a blessing and a curse, right? The cost of innovation is high. The cost of rolling out, of doing the R&D in terms of not only creating the new products, but also thinking about where people are going to be by the time that you can actually bring this product to market. Those become interesting challenges. As you all think about innovation now, what does it look like, in that brewing space? There are these broad industry trends where, someone else is making something, so I have to make something like that. But then there are also, as you speak to it, Dave, like those soul ideas of how could we respond to where these trends are moving, but do it in a way that speaks to our own values and our own kind of approach. So for Ska and for Rheingeist, how do each of you think about innovation and put a framework around it that both manages it in a way that it makes sense, that you can evaluate it looking forward, but then build innovation so that these new products that come from it actually speak back to the brands that you've built?
It's interesting for us because, as you mentioned, we started our distillery Peachtree years ago, and so early on, and we were also an early canning craft brewery. So I think when you look at innovation in terms of the beyond beer category, so whether you're talking about seltzers or say RTDs, we had the opportunity to be canning RTDs the very, very early stages of that. But once again, we're kind of purists on the distillery side, and we're sort of on the brewery side, which is where I function day to day. I really, the two are actually separate businesses located in different parts of the state. So it's not under one roof or anything, but we had the ability, we had the technology and we had the product, but just canning a mixed drink or something along those lines just kind of wasn't in our DNA. We talked about it early, wasn't interesting to us. Here at the brewery, I still have this, I just keep coming back to beer. And like you mentioned, I've seen it is cyclical. You see beer go through some phases, and you also see things like whether it's wine coolers or the Zima products or whatever it might be, they come and go. And I really believe that they are going to continue to come and go. We're going to keep seeing crazy things pop up and go away and pop up and go away. But there is one constant, and that's beer. And it has been for thousands of years, as you know. And so really we lean heavily into it. So the question really becomes, how do we innovate within the category of craft beer? For us, we don't need to look outside of that because it's not in our wheelhouse and it doesn't feel good. And maybe that could be to our detriment at some point, I guess, but so be it. I'd rather it be that way than do something that I don't enjoy or believe in. So I think it's interesting now, focusing in Colorado. Cole was talking about how, you got to go deeper where you already are now. And in Colorado, that's where 90% of our beer is sold. The grocery stores and the chains didn't start taking full strength beer in 2019. And now they have wine in the stores as of this year. And so it's really interesting when you start thinking of what does innovation mean outside of our own tap room. I think some of the grocery stores, now that they've had a couple years, are pulling back and they want tried and true. Whereas we did have a couple years of new beers, got good new placements. So it's tough, at least in Colorado, it's tough to navigate. The bonus is our tap room. We have a pilot system and we come out with at least a beer a week. And that's a lot of fun. And we use a lot of input from our on-premise consumers and our customers that like to come here and drink, and then our brewers and our younger brewers that really want to innovate beyond what we've classically done. We mess around with that a lot, and then if something seems to have legs in the tasting room, we might start to run with it at that point, and then it's a new game. How do you get it into the chains, and do the independent stores still want it now that they're facing these challenges, because you can buy beer and wine in grocery stores. So everyone's got a different thought process out in the buying world now. And just that's all before you ever even get to the consumer. So that's really where it counts, is how do you pull through at the consumer level, which is really difficult to gauge nowadays. It's all over the place. And so I don't know. It is a great question. We're fairly steady right now as far as sales. We do come out with new canned beers fairly regularly, that we get out market wide, and they do okay, but I think the days of flagships are gone. So that's probably, nothing's going to become a new flagship for a brewery like us anymore.
So do you approach it from a standpoint of, well, we're going to need to have a new product every quarter, that we can then bring out, and how are we going to feed an R&D program that can, match this, that we know that we need to bring out to the market? Or is it a more organic approach, like you talk about, where when we have an idea that gets legs and that starts building steam with our own product testing within our tap room, that we then lead out into, take it to the market? Or is it some blend of both?
It's kind of a blend of both. When you're talking about like the chain stores, for example, they're looking further and further out. If you're talking about a new product in a chain store, you only have a couple opportunities a year to get put into a grocery store, and you have to be pretty prepared to present 6-8 months before that's going to happen. So you do have to have some planning there. But we still have the bulk of our sales in the independent stores. Colorado Liquor, I guess, is what the category is called. But that enables us to, we're fairly nimble because we're still relatively small, I guess. And so we can do, if something hits and we don't want to miss a window of opportunity because consumer taste can change so quickly. We can release that and get it out in our independent stores as quickly as possible, and then make it a mainstay in our tasting room. So we do a lot of planning throughout the year, but we also fly by the seat of our pants, and whatever the consumer might want, or if something hits, we'll run with it in a hurry.
Sure. Cole, what for Rheingeist, what does your innovation program look like? Do you again have set goals, or do you approach it more organically? How do you all build a framework around that, and how do you then start to evaluate what the opportunities might be for some of these things in the innovation space?
So the last 4 or 5 years definitely have been challenging. We as a company saw the rise of seltzer and let it pass by. But then as the pressure for all of this non-beer stuff and people talking about craft kind of plateauing came about, we're like, all right, we'll jump in with FMB, we'll do some hard tea. So we've been playing around in that space. But what we've really learned is those FMB consumers are a completely different consumer. Craft beer consumers are very promiscuous. They'll bounce around to the other categories. Those other consumers that live outside of craft do not do the same. So when it comes to gaining share, customer acquisition, and trying to build a new brand in a completely new segment of the cooler, it's very difficult and very expensive. You need to advertise heavily. You need to be getting in front of those people. And particularly in the last few years, all of beverage has seen pretty wild growth as far as just new companies getting into the game and new brands being launched. That's not even just in alcohol. Look at energy drinks and juice and water and all of these other things. Every celebrity's got, 3 or 4 versions of each. It's kind of the new thing. So what we've kind of realized over the last couple of years, similar to what Scott's doing, is kind of looking back in at craft beer and saying, this is what we do really well, rather than divide our focus and kind of try to do all the things. Let's just focus on what we're doing and what we're good at, and that's craft beer. So we're kind of transitioning all of our innovation back inward, and it seems to be working for us. Truth, by far our flagship IPA, is still growing. We just launched this year its first line extension with Juicy Truth. So you could argue probably way behind the trend when everybody else was launching their hazy IPAs, and their line extensions, pre-COVID, but it's working great for us. And I think part of our success might actually be that we dragged our feet a little bit and didn't do it until we really felt we needed to, and it was time. So I think a big part of meaningful innovation is directing your focus to things that are going to be impactful and not just trying to jump on every trend and do everything just because everybody else is doing it.
There's something to the old Apple analogy, isn't there, Patrick? That idea that you don't need to be the first to market with a product, but you need to be the best.
Yeah, I mean, look, in software, we have the same exact thing, right? It's a different version of product. It was one of the things I was thinking about as prepping for this, trying to draw analogies from my background to what you guys are the businesses you guys run. But I mean, on a relative basis, it's easy to take 10 to 20 developers and say, hey, let's go build a product, right? And it may not be, again, it might be an extension, to what we do today, an adjacency to what we do today, just like a seltzer or just like a cider would be. But exactly to Cole's point, like the product is actually, like building the product is the easy part. It's the go-to-market is the hard part, right? And what your brand stands for, what your sales organization is comfortable selling, your entire go-to-market motion. That's the hard part that, new competitors, because at the end of the day, like when you build a new product, that's the whole product market fit thing, right? You're probably actually targeting a new customer, and a new persona. And that just doesn't happen. That doesn't happen just because you're on the shelf. It doesn't just happen because we give a product to our salespeople and say, go sell it. It's heavy lifting, I've noticed it. Like I said, as an informed consumer, I've noticed it in my own refrigerator. Right, my refrigerator was the garage refrigerator has always been my craft beer refrigerator. That's everything. It was pretty much, I don't know. It was like craft beer and then holiday leftovers, and that's what that fridge did, right? And now I have two daughters that are in college, and that fridge is now, it's a craft beer fridge, but there's FMBs and RTDs and Radlers, there's all kinds of shit in there. and look, I will
you
say
clean it out.
Yeah, I know, exactly. Because guess what? They don't, all those other ones, they don't move as fast as the craft beer does. The craft beer still seems to turn over, right? But the other ones seem to fester in there sometimes. But I think
they've got a long shelf life. It'll be okay.
The good news is they have a long shelf life, right? But I think a little bit to Cole's point, right? I don't think, again, just using myself as a proxy, I mean, I think that has been growth in share of wallet, not dollars taken away from my corner of the fridge, right? Like my craft beer is still there. It's just now there's another shelf full of other things that are, but again, my daughters, they move like the wind, man. And they exhibit a whole different kind of, just like your son, right? They exhibit a whole different brand preference model, than what, certainly than what me and my buddies are all used to, right?
We could talk about influencer marketing later on and see how much you all are spending on that. But no, I think it actually would be good to come back and talk about the cost of launching a new brand, because it's something I've heard. I mean, it was even within the beer space, not even the beyond beer space. I was talking to Doug Valicki of Revolution back at Fobab, and he was mentioning the cost of launching a premium lager brand for them. It feels like, we'll just launch a new beer. Well, it's a multi-year process involving millions and millions of dollars and an extreme spend in order to be able to make that brand relevant in a market that's already very crowded. And so, rather than just launching a product and letting it die, if you want to give it a chance to live, what you have to invest in it is actually much more significant than what people think about. I want to come back to that, but before we do, for Rheingeist and for Ska Brewing, how material are these beyond beer categories? Just how valuable are they to your businesses, and how do you make, or have you then retrenched and pulled back from them because what you were making from these was not delivering on the cost of putting them out there into a market. Have you evaluated the success of these? Or then, and in that kind of context, how long of a leash would you give some of these products? How much investment, how much risk are you willing to take in some of these categories before you say, hey, this isn't working, or either we need to spend more if we're going to even make this relevant, or is that worth spending that much more, and will we get our investment out of it? How do you make some of those kind of go, no-go decisions, but then also evaluate how a product is doing in the market and kind of course correct, through the marketing and the go-to-market process around those? Cole, you got to start this one.
Yeah. Unfortunately, these days, that's less and less of an internal conversation. Obviously, Kroger's in our backyard here in Cincinnati. If you're not performing on a shelf, your retail partners will let you know. And they have less and less patience for failing products every year, just because there's so many new brands and categories are shifting pretty dramatically every year. So the same amount of shelf space is getting shared around between different beverage types. So resets get crazier every year. Whereas you used to have kind of 2 opportunities to reset in the year, now there's really just the spring reset, and you get in what you get in, and maybe a fall tweak if you're lucky, but unlikely for most people. So it's if you're not showing performance in a year, you're going to have some pretty dramatic impacts to your points of distribution and the number of retail spots you hold. So that's really going to drive kind of the success of your innovation. So if it's not successful quickly, you're going to need to be ready to pivot. And if your year-over-year comps are not favorable, you need to pivot dramatically, because you will not survive a third year. So again, it's you got to be adaptable. You've got to be ready to come armed with good data to tell why your sales strategy is working, or if it's not working, what are you going to do specifically to course correct and to help your retailer be successful with your product. And if you just come and be like, well, we hope trends turn around, and we really feel good about the spring, they're not going to buy it, and they're going to ditch you.
Are there some arguments and some plans that resonate with retailers in that sense? Like, what are they looking for? What's a plan that would make sense?
So they're looking for you to capitalize on where you're strong, right? So in Rheingeist, in Ohio, Truth is huge. We're really strong in beer. So if we come with new beer innovation, they're usually pretty accepting, and they're like, yep, your beer portfolio is stellar. Happy to see you playing around in that space. Whereas obviously in our non-beer space, we're struggling a little bit. And so that's part of what's driving us to kind of pivot back into beer, is we know we're not going to win as many shelf placements in FMB that we would have 4 years ago. So, that's the conversation we're having, and it's a nice open conversation that we get to have. I think not all breweries probably get to be as open with their big retail partners, but it's something we're in a fortunate situation to be in.
From those retail partners, how much does price sensitivity from the consumer side weigh into their product decisions around some of these beyond beer products that they'll consider from you all?
A lot. You've got to come with some serious marketing dollars to say this is premium and you should charge a premium price. If you just come in and say it's crafty, and as such that means it's premium, that doesn't resonate as much anymore. If you say, hey, this is an expensive product, you've got to back it up with more than just saying the liquid tastes good. And that's kind of how craft beer has been too, right? Like, most expensive craft beers are the ones that everybody thinks are the best tasting and the, fullest flavor. I'm sure we all have comments on the validity of that across the board, but generally that's how it works. And that's particularly right now, everybody's hyper focused on kind of being line priced with the rest of the industry. Obviously, with everybody taking price and that going up, to what we were talking about earlier, the customer is very price sensitive right now. So it's a a pretty big ask to come in with a product that you say is premium, and ask a retailer and a consumer to pay that when they're already paying a premium for what they've been drinking the whole time.
Sure, Dave. You all have done fermented hard seltzers and hop water, and definitely played around in this beyond space. How has that kind of evaluation process worked for you, and what have you found? In terms of how to both connect those to consumers and connect those to retailers, and make them stand out within a very crowded marketplace.
I like the question right now because it's something that we're dealing with at the moment. It's really only our hard seltzers that we are kind of struggling with. That's our only other non-beer product from Scott. And we came out with swinging pretty early in the seltzer game, and we had our first variety pack out there. It took off, that had a year of great growth, like anybody that jumped in at that time. And then we followed up with another variety pack and 3 other flavors, and that didn't do as well. And that was kind of at the end of that first year, and then it started dropping off. What's been really interesting for us is that original assorted mixed pack is pretty steady. And once we peaked and we hit a decline, we thought that was just the end of the discussion, and let's run through some inventory and move on. And then it plateaued, which kind of caught us all off guard. And so we still have, that same assorted 12-pack of seltzer out in the market in Colorado. It's only in Colorado at the moment. And now we're at the point like, gosh, maybe we should do something about it or try to work on it, because it's been kind of, for lack of a better term, an afterthought. We didn't expect it to hang in there, and it is. And now it's, should we build off of that, or should we just try and maintain it? Or should we forget about it entirely, actually, and just focus on beer, kind of like we've been talking about? So it's a good question. It's one we're asking ourselves right now. And I don't really know what the answer is or how to move forward on it. It's been, like I said, it's just me particularly. Fortunately, there's people on our team that think differently than myself, but I'm always just thinking about beer. And so it's kind of for me, it's not what I'm drinking. We put a lot of work into it, but now it's a question like, gosh, is there some potential and opportunity there that maybe we're missing out on that, I should just get over it and move forward. But once again, it's a great question right now, and we're trying to answer it. And I don't really know what the future holds as far as I think as far as non-beer goes, the seltzer's about it. I don't know. Every time we really have a serious discussion, we kind of just come back to beer. But we're at that point right now where I think we're on that line that you're talking about. Like, what is your metric? And how do you decide what kind of effort and dollars do you want to put into something? And is the return there? And what is that? And we're right there trying to figure it out, or walking that line right now with our seltzers. But I think they have a solid foundation. I think we would disappoint some folks if we let it go.
I think one of the evolutions, and I'm sure, like you said, Dave, you guys, and Cole, you guys are doing this, right? But I think a lot of this, there's another analogy, right, to the software business, right? Like, it's that evolution from, a lot of companies go through this. Encompass has gone through this, right? For 17 years, we were a one product company, right? We built distribution software. That's what we did. Then we came together with Orchestra in the brewing production space. We came together. A lot of people don't realize we came together with a company called Vintrace just over a year and a half ago. That's kind of the analog in wine and in wine production. And when you start operating that way, all of a sudden you have to operate. You're operating either it's a brand portfolio or a product portfolio, and and the metrics aren't the same, right? Like certain products, there's that classic Boston Consulting Group stuff that we sit around and do all the time, right? We have there's cash cows, there's dogs, there's stars, there's question marks, and you set different metrics and objectives for every one of those different parts of your portfolio, right? So, like, again, to your point, Dave, like that variety pack might be a nice little product. It may not justify like a bigger investment profile. It just is what it is. It fits your portfolio, and fills a spot. The key thing I would say probably, and I know, is getting to the place where you have the data to understand the profitability of those products, right? Because that's obviously a super important. You can run a brand portfolio, and you don't have to have every product be this equal profit. Doesn't have to have the equal growth, but you do need to understand the return that each one of those products brings back to you. Otherwise, you just fall into the trap of like, well, we got to figure out how to make it become a star and become a high growth product, or it's not worth keeping, right? And if you don't have the data underneath, like to kind of support, portfolio decisions, then you're a little bit flying blind on what you should do with different aspects of your portfolio. It's fine to have low growth products that are highly profitable, just like it's fine to have really high growth products that are less profitable, right? But you got to understand that. And I think at the end of the day, at Encompass, that's what we're trying to do, is at least give people like Dave and Cole like the data to make those decisions, right? We're not going to tell you what your strategy is, right? But hopefully we can help give you the data, arm you with the data, like Dave's Cole said a little while ago, to think about how to make those decisions.
No, that's a good point. That brings us to another big question I had for you all is, what are some of those key data points, that help define some of these go, no go decisions? Whenever you're going to launch a new product, or even when you're thinking about, how to support existing products, we're all willing to invest to help grow products. Again, as Patrick said, you understand what the opportunities are probably going to be for these, but how you determine what those opportunities are really depends on how you look at that data. Most of the data that we have is obviously trailing. We can see how a product did, and then those channels, that how it did in some of those channels. That does not necessarily predict future performance. It simply shows us what it did in the past. But what are some of those key, data points that you look at in evaluating the past or current success of some of your products, or even identify those things that if you put a little bit of more oomph behind, that you might be able to see some outsized return from? Are there some key metrics that you guys rely on in some of that decision making?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, from a business perspective, gross margin is always kind of top of mind. And, it's across the whole portfolio. We kind of have targets that blended, we want to hit, allowing certain new innovation to fall below. And as it grows, hopefully it comes in line. And, things like 19.2 ounce cans and how those roll in with a blended margin with, their 6-pack or 12-pack family. That's definitely something we keep an eye on. Because the last thing you want to do is have a bunch of really high-end, low-margin products driving all of your growth, and then suddenly your profitability isn't what it once was, even though your volume growth is great.
All of those triple dry hopped IPAs, right?
Exactly. And we saw a little bit of that, as we got out of beer into the FMB space. It was, post-COVID, right as sugar prices were skyrocketing and supply chains were blowing up. And so, 10 years ago, sugar bev was pretty cost effective and, cheap to make. It suddenly became a very expensive product. So that was a reckoning we had to have with sugar-based beverages of kind of, from a cost of goods standpoint, it wasn't as favorable as it used to be. So, that's a big one for us. And then on the sales side, share, just kind of market share is a big one for us. And that's kind of how we've been measuring success as our growth has started to slow down and plateau a little bit, especially in 2020 when, on-premise was shutting down and it was all retail. Because we're so heavily self-distributed, we were able to gain a lot of share in that time when other breweries were waiting for their wholesalers who'd streamlined their portfolios, because of staffing issues and all of that. They couldn't get their innovation out. They were having a hard time keeping shelves stocked. And we were able, because of our internal team, to kind of do all of that for ourselves. And we saw some really nice share gains during that time that have continued. And I think that's what's helped us get to where we are now, where we continue to grow. Even our flagship, where a lot of other people are kind of stagnating, is we gained a lot of share of mind, and we kind of moved ourselves into being, the IPA for Ohio.
Sure. So there's some context to your decision, your decision making, where it's not just in terms of pure dollar amounts, but also, hey, let's look at us relative to the overall market. Does that suggest that you all are fairly comfortable with the market itself remaining somewhat static and not necessarily itself growing? I mean, or that you have settled into kind of a strategizing with craft at its current dollar and volume kind of place in the market.
Yeah, no, we've done a lot of work internally to drive down cost of goods. So we're in a comfortable place profit wise. If the market stays where it is, prices stay where they're at, we're okay. There's a lot of competition in craft, but what we've kind of decided and figured out is craft beer is not going anywhere. There may be fewer drinkers, which means there needs to be fewer breweries, which we're kind of seeing, right? But we're confident by focusing on quality and keeping meaningful innovation coming out, we'll rise to the top.
Dave, how do you guys, what are some of the metrics that you guys look at and evaluating opportunities or, making no-go decisions, thinking about where to put energy and investment, or also thinking about how to, where you can find more efficiencies within that kind of business?
I think, when Patrick was talking earlier, he's kind of talking about, your higher volume, lower margin products and your higher margin, lower volume products, and whatever the mix within your portfolio looks like, that blended margin, every business knows what that blended margin is that they need to operate sustainably at. And that can change. The one thing I would add there is that for us, after a tight year like 2023 has been, cash flow becomes more of a decision maker for us than profitability. And unfortunately, it comes at the expense of profitability, making cash flow decisions. So, and what I mean by that is paying more for lower amounts of inventory for raw materials, or even on the production side, it could be when you're talking about innovation, do you come out with something that's quicker to make, even an ale versus a lager? Certainly not probably when you're cash poor or you're having a tight cash flow situation. We're not barrel aging a lot of stuff for 2 years or a year. And so some of those decisions come in, and then how quickly you can actually take it to market and actually create cash flow. This is really the first year that we've really kind of had to focus on that. We're very seasonal brewery. So we have shoulder seasons, October, November, and then March, April. And where things slow down, and we usually, we build up our coffers in the busy seasons, and then we ride through the slower seasons. And this fall has been particularly tough. So a lot of those decisions we're making, they're gonna come at the expense of the bottom line, but they're gonna bridge the gap until the spring or the summer. So those metrics that help us really kind of understand day to day, as opposed to looking at our balance sheet at the end of the year or P&L. It's kind of those are metrics we're really paying close attention to, and really for me, it's the most attention I've ever paid to that. We've always been pretty fortunate and been able to scoot through some of those shoulder seasons, but now it's something very real. And I know down the line we're gonna be like, oh, gosh, but that all came at the expense of profit because we were paying more for everything, and that's there's a domino effect there. I think the other thing when you're talking about making business decisions is, you had mentioned it kind of when we were talking about what we were going to be speaking about, things like opening extensions or extending our tap room or opening another satellite tap room, and looking at the metrics there. What does that look like? We did as you I think know, we opened a brewery and a distillery hub in Boulder right at the onset of COVID, which we held on to for a couple years, but we blew it out of the gates. Just the night of our grand opening was the night the governor shut down all the bars and restaurants. So we're a little gun shy
I was there. I was there for that friends and family opening down in Boulder. And then you're right. The next day we were locked down. I still came out for your opening though, Dave.
I appreciate that. Well, that made us a little gun shy.
Sure.
But so looking at that, I think some of the metrics we might look at now after that experience, if we were to do that again, which we're always considering, is maybe something smaller where that new business itself doesn't need to be so profitable, but maybe the beer that we're selling ourselves, that we're making at our headquarters, that volume really helps us with the overall picture. So maybe, we're looking at more at brewing closer to our capacity within our four walls, because we built the brewery to do more than it is currently doing. So now we have to look at how do we increase our volume. And if it's through a satellite tap room, it's not, we're trying to open up a super separate, super profitable business. We're just trying to increase our volume at home. That's a more important metric than it would have been even 2 years ago for us. So I don't know, worth throwing out there, I thought.
Sure. I want to definitely come back to that hospitality question, but I want to maybe finish up on talking about how to, this visibility into some of these key metrics. And I know you had some thoughts on that, Patrick.
Yeah, well, on the key metric side, I do want to, obviously all the things these guys talk about, gross margin, share, how that turns into cash, right? Especially, all those things, are super important. I am a little curious, as you know, as you guys all know, as I mentioned before, distribution's a big, it's a big part of Encompass's business and history, and I'm curious, I guess, Cole, on the, how big of a lever is self-distro, right? And not everybody has that, not everybody has that lever available to them. It's a big step, but I know, when you think about a phrase like, becoming the IPA for Ohio, right? Which is that is a defensible brand position, to take, right? How much is self-distro a part of that, making that strategy come to life? And then what metrics do you think, are there metrics that you think about because as someone who plays in has a big self-distro footprint, are there other metrics that on the distribution side that you think about, other than just purely the production ones?
Like I said earlier, self-distribution is huge for us. It's 54% of our total business is which is Cincinnati and Columbus. So it's a giant piece of the business. I think our market penetration is significantly increased because of our self-distribution. Instead of just having a sales rep call on an account, you've also got a driver who's popping in once or twice a week to drop off. It's a whole nother touch point. It's more share of mind with beer buyers. We've got great relationships with all those people because they're interacting with multiple parts of our business and multiple people. And they have more avenues to get things fixed if something goes wrong. So, it's a big piece, certainly. From a sales and distribution perspective, there's always rate of sale and points of distribution and that are kind of the standard metrics. Now, from a distribution and a freight perspective, we're looking at total volume on routes. Like we kind of launched our distribution business with a fleet of Sprinter vans, which in the early days worked great. But as you blow past the 3,000 pound weight limit on a Sprinter van and it becomes 6,000 pounds, the maintenance costs on those vans and the life of those vans drops dramatically. So we're having to kind of rethink our distribution business and how we operate it with box trucks and kind of more traditional vehicles that, bigger distributors have been using for a long time. But as a 10-year-old distributor that only distributes Rheingeist, that hasn't been something until recently that we've had to deal with. So, total number of cases, total number of kegs per driver per route, and kind of how we're routing those people to manage that and level load that volume is key, and definitely something we're highly focused on.
That's a massive amount to keep internally, to do over 50,000 barrels of self-distribution. I mean, you're a logistics company and not just a brewery then at that scale. Because
what's interesting though is if you look at the wine side of our business, and again, like people don't realize when we came together, these guys of Intrace, we have about 225 craft brewers, in the business, but we have like over 800 wineries now that are in our business as well. And DTC or direct consumer, Wine Club is a much more significant distribution channel, right, in wine, than obviously for the vast majority of craft brewers, right, and it's for all the reasons you guys mentioned, but they're still shipping heavy glass. It's not. They're still shipping heavy glass liquid. To across state lines. But it's interesting how in wine, it's a much more fragmented production environment. And that hasn't consolidated to the same degree as you kind of mentioned at the beginning of the show here on in craft. Right, but that direct to consumer piece is a big part of the business, right?
Most of these wineries, there are large, conglomerate wineries.
Sure.
The vast majority are relatively small operations, and that DTC, component is the key piece that allows people to find the margin, and create that added value to the agricultural product that they're creating in order to make those businesses successful. You're 100% right, and I mean I think there's a lot to be seen in this craft beer world in the future. Obviously, the wine folks have way better lobbyists that have been able to find favorable laws to make it possible for all of this direct-to-consumer, interstate shipping in a way that does not exist necessarily for brewers right now.
Yep.
But I digress. Let's jump back to that hospitality question because you started in on it, Dave, and I think that it's important noting this if we're talking again about future proofing, that up until the pandemic, this kind of predominant idea amongst breweries is that you should sell as much as you can direct to consumer over your own bar. That's where you're going to drive the most margin. And so we've seen, especially leading in the years of the late 2010s, breweries opening up satellite taproom after satellite taproom, maxing out depending on what those state laws are, and and then post-pandemic, obviously, some of that strategy changed quite a bit, not just because of the pandemic itself, but also because of what the pandemic has meant for consumer behavior that I think that, it's in a way that we didn't necessarily predict. We didn't necessarily predict that the pandemic would change the way that people think about going out and even change the frequency at which they might go out for a drink with friends and then instead spend more time at home. Does Ska as well as Rheingeist, both then think about this kind of hospitality piece, how that figures into your future business plans, where you see that going, and how you all are making investment decisions around it based on where you see consumer activity be going?
Yeah, it's an interesting puzzle. There's one big thing that we noticed here, in our own tasting room. We have a restaurant as well here. Was before COVID, most of our physical space was taken up on any given day that it was crowded with people drinking beer. A lot of people out playing cornhole, people standing at the bar 2 or 3 deep when it was busy, people just standing around. And then COVID happened. And, I think we were at about 25 to 30% of our revenues were food versus 70 beer. And after COVID, when things started to open up, suddenly you had to be sitting at a table. The tables had to be 6 feet apart. And unfortunately, I think we actually changed the behavior of like our local customer. And they got trained to come here only if they were eating food, and our margins are not in food. And so I just long for the days where, and now we're the opposite, we're 70%, well, 55 to 70, depending on time of year, food versus beer in our own walls. So sales have continued to grow. That's the bright spot. Overall net revenues are up, but the ratio of beer to food has changed heavy toward food. It's great, but it's a different model. It's a different atmosphere. So if you look at an extension of our tasting room, whatever it might be, even if it's here at our headquarters or in another satellite location, the model is going to be built toward drinking beer. And not that there's anything against food, and I love having it here, but it's a much more difficult thing to manage, and you can't make any money on food. They just like beer. I mean, I know we kind of isolate ourselves, and we think about, oh gosh, raw materials have gone up, cost of goods everything has gone up. It's not just breweries, it's everywhere. So whether it's gas or restaurants, whatever it might be. And so food is really, really difficult. It's great because people can have another beer and they're not, not going to have the same effects from the alcohol. And it is nice. It is kind of a nice atmosphere inside, but we kind of lost the beer part, even outside with cornhole or whatever, and dogs and people drinking beer and doing whatever it is they might do. And it's also, that's more in my personal wheelhouse. I feel better in the beer world. I understand it better. The food world's difficult for me, but we're in a model now where food is part of our future. If we ever extend, it's because of the laws in Colorado. Any other liquor license we have will now include food unless we change everything again.
Do you all have data on frequency of visit, from existing customers? I've been curious about that, it doesn't take, what we haven't seen is people stop going out. But if somebody goes out 2 nights instead of 3 nights, and we start seeing that on a broader, kind of aggregate scale, well, all of a sudden you lose a third of the business, or the entire hospitality business loses a third of its business. That's a humongous impact in aggregate from something that seems pretty minor at a small and an individual personal scale. And so I think, if I look at it, I suspect that's what's happening to have some impact on a lot of breweries that might not be people's first visit, but might have been their third or fourth visit, for a brewery in a week. I think some of those breweries are probably facing some of the largest impact in terms of this kind of business reset or this, these kind of turbulent waters. Do you have any data around repeat visits and the frequency of visits from individual customers? Obviously, you want to have the individual details hidden on that kind of stuff just for individual privacy, but I'm just curious if you have any insight and data around that, and if it's even possible to pull that out of some of your data.
We do not really at Raygeist. It's certainly something we're looking at and we're trying to acquire. But yeah, how do you do that in a way that doesn't feel invasive and, feels authentic? We're trying to figure that out. We do know we're largely tourism driven. We're a destination brewery in kind of north of downtown Cincinnati. We don't have a huge local, visitor pool. We've got some people that live around the neighborhood, but there's also 24 other bars and restaurants and breweries and distilleries around here. So we do a lot of first time, new to town. What do you do when you go to Cincinnati? You eat Cincinnati chili, and then you go down to Raygeist and have a beer. And that's kind of been a huge thing for us, which has worked. But yeah, post-COVID, things changed. You can no longer just kind of throw up your doors and shout into the street, "We make beer," and expect people to come in. You've really got to tailor your customer experience to all types of people. We used to just serve craft beer and a few other things. Now we are putting a lot more effort into building a spirits program and having NA offerings and things for kids. And, really, if we're going to capture somebody, let's make sure we can actually capture them and their family and their friends, and, really tailor the experience. If people are going to go out less, they're still going to go out, but just not as often. What can we do to make them choose us as their destination? And that runs all the way through, events and kind of how we market the tap room, trying to embed ourselves in the community and kind of be really intentional in what we do and why we do it, so that people choose to stop by our tap room when they do go out.
Sure. Patrick, do you have any thoughts on the hospitality piece and how, data can help make better decisions around some of these things?
Well, I think we see, I think we're starting to see a handful of customers, right? And, certainly I would just say with hospitality, starting to connect point of sale systems, into their production systems, right? So that there's a little bit more of a connected, even internal supply chain, right? Like what's the, little tighter connection between the demand, in the hospitality part of the business, into the production side. Obviously in the bigger supply chain, that's been a big area of focus for us, kind of automating the depletion data, what is actually moving in at Kroger's, right? As opposed to waiting for the distribution salesperson to go in and count, and like that lag time, there's a lot of interesting innovations we're doing in a product called Retail Insights that starts pumping that, making that real-time data, which again starts to feel like a lot of other supply chains that maybe don't have the benefit of the 3-tier system, right? But that kind of real-time data, it starts to inform, just again makes you more intelligent. It gives you more insights into what's happening in the market, whether it's in your hospitality part of your business or all the way through distribution, right?
Sure. Well, we've been talking for a little while now. We need to kind of wrap up. Maybe we'll wrap up on, a bigger, broader question, and we can, kind of go around the table. Dave, if you're thinking about some of the biggest takeaways and some of the things that the brewers out there listening should be focused on the most in terms of the health of their business, what's one or two major pieces of advice that you could give to folks, the things that may not be obvious that they should, definitely pay close attention to, and, as they are managing their businesses in the next 3 to 5 years?
I think, one of the things we didn't really talk about very specifically when we were talking about costs, but labor is a huge one for us. It's a huge one for everybody, for every brewer. And I think it's interesting because there's probably a number of folks that got into the brewing world when it was absolutely on fire because it was on fire. Maybe the passion wasn't there. Those people might come and go. Then there's the owner operator in a small tap room that understands probably what I'm about to say, that it's a lot of work and there's no getting around it, and it is a low margin business. Then I think once you start getting into distributing breweries up into the regional size, for us, I think keeping an eye on labor, it's tighter than it's ever been. We kind of have to reevaluate how we do things. And I think you're going to see some of at least in our case, seems to be a smart move, and some advice that I would offer is that some of the maybe upper management or owners, founders like myself, need to be getting their hands dirty again, and really kind of get in there and start working. And the way you look and build your labor model now, at least for Sky, it's different than it was a couple of years ago. It's pretty lean, and we've had a lot more. I used to really believe in everybody having a strong focus within their role, and I kind of pushed against being a jack of all trades, because I always felt jack of all trades, master of none. You got to focus on something, and I flipped that. And I think we cross-train much more than we ever have. We have a program, an onboarding program, and everybody gets trained in every department on the production side. And then, a lot of our management and admin, they hop on the canning line or whatever it might be when we need those people. And I think sometimes, what we've really focused on is that not having any influence on quality in a negative way, but put it in place where if you're maximizing the efficiency of everybody's time, especially when you're running lean. You just don't have the room to wiggle. We don't anyways, like we used to. And I think labor, it's your biggest cost. So really looking at that and evaluating how you run the operation, it's not a bad idea, even when you grow a bit, to have people that can do some of the other work there at a quality level and to actually really put some effort in that training. It's been a big focus for us this year. And I mean, the last few years for sure.
Heck yeah. Cole, what were some a takeaway or two that you have?
Yeah, I mean, I think, back to my thoughts on prioritization and focus. Make sure when you're looking at your brand portfolio and what you're innovating in, you're right-sizing your resourcing. If you've got something that's growing or even something that's flat, but it's a big part of your portfolio, make sure you're still giving that resources and you're not letting it wither and die because you're too focused on finding the next big thing and the next piece of innovation. And that's not to say ignore innovation, but, I see a lot of effort. Sometimes it's, 80% of the effort for 20% of the business. And that's how flagships fail. And that's how the cash cows, start to wither away. So just every year kind of having that focus exercise of like, what's important to us? What are our priorities? They can't be everything. We can't prioritize every brand. We can't prioritize every opportunity. So how do we resource that accordingly and kind of allocate the limited resources that we all have these days to the right place?
Sure. Patrick, takeaways.
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, there's a lot of analogies. Again, I'll say between, although, a software company might sound like a very different kind of company than a craft brewer. There's a lot of analogies, right? A lot of software companies, including Encompass, right, you get to a certain level of growth just by winning on product, right? You build a great product, it catches on in the marketplace, and you just grow. You grow in product, and then and that gets you to a certain level, and then at some point you've got to not just be great at building product, you've got to be great at sales and marketing, you've got to be great at operations, you've got to be great at customer success. And I think I listen to these guys talk, and that's the maturation of these businesses, just like the maturation of a lot of software companies, right? You've got to become, we say it in Encompass all the time, you've got to be world-class at every aspect of your business, not just one part of your business. And I think that's, we all had the luxury of being just really great at product and having that, like you said, you put out a sign, we make great beer, put out a sign, we make great software, and a lot of good things happen, right? But you get to a scale, and if your aspirations are continue to scale, you gotta be world class at everything you do, and that's just it's hard work. There's no doubt about it. But I think that realization is it's very parallel to all of our businesses, and I can hear it from David Cole, right? How do you stay true to who you are, but scale? That's the trick.
That is a great place to bring this to a close. Thanks again for joining me on this special business-focused episode of the podcast, brought to you interruption-free by the transformational beverage industry technologists at Encompass. Visit Encompass Tech to learn more about how they can help future-proof your business with modern technology. Dave, Cole, Patrick, thank you for joining me in this conversation. It's been enlightening and eye-opening and mind-expanding to talk about how you all approach all of these subjects, and I appreciate you sharing your thoughts with our listeners. Cheers. Thanks to all of you.
Thanks, Jamie.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Yeah, thanks, you guys.
We'll talk soon. Take care. This podcast has been brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine, for those who love to make and drink great beer. To learn more or to subscribe, visit beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.